That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The wind whipped across the ranges at Lydd, carrying the sharp tang of salt from the nearby coast and the faint, acrid bite of cordite lingering from the previous day's exercises. It was a typical early autumn morning in Kent, the sky a uniform slate grey that pressed down on the sprawling firing grounds like a damp blanket. Private Eleanor Hargrove stood at the edge of the assembly area, her boots sinking slightly into the soft, rain-soaked earth. She was 28, with a frame that spoke of quiet endurance rather than brute strength, shoulders squared under the weight of her standard-issue smock, her dark hair pulled back into a regulation bun that revealed the faint scar along her jawline, a mark from some long-forgotten training mishap. The range at Lydd was one of the Army's crown jewels for marksmanship, its vast stretches of dunes and targets stretching out towards the sea, where the horizon blurred into mist. Soldiers from the 1st Battalion, Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, had been bussed in from their barracks at Tidworth for a week of live-fire drills. Roll call had come at 0600 sharp, the sergeant's voice cutting through the drizzle like a bayonet. "Hargrove, sound off." Eleanor had responded with a crisp, "Here, Sergeant," her tone even betraying nothing. Now, as the platoon formed up on the weathered concrete pads, rifles slung and packs adjusted, the routine hummed with the familiar rhythm of British military life, boots scraping in unison, the clink of magazines being checked, the low murmur of orders exchanged in clipped accents. Sergeant Major Wilkins presided over it all, his presence as unyielding as the iron sights on their SA-80s. A veteran of tours in Helmand and Belfast, he moved among the ranks with the deliberate gait of a man who had earned his chevrons through sheer persistence. "Right, you lot," he barked, his voice carrying over the wind. "We're on the long range today, 800 meters out, pop-up targets. No faffing about. Precision, not fireworks." The platoon, 30 strong, mostly lads in their early 20s with the fresh-faced eagerness of recent passes out of Catterick, nodded in acknowledgement. Elena, positioned at the rear of her section, kept her eyes forward, her gloved hands steady on the strap of her rifle case. She had been with the battalion for 3 years, transferred in after basic from a signals unit up north. Competent, they said of her in the orderly room files, reliable, but never exceptional. Not in the eyes of the others, anyway. As the groups broke off to their firing points, the tension that had been simmering beneath the surface of the morning began to show. Lance Corporal Davies, a wiry Geordie with a penchant for needling those who didn't push back, sidled up to Eleanor during the equipment check. He was her section's second in command, though you'd hardly know it from the way he treated her, like an afterthought, a placeholder in the line. "Oi, Hargrove," he muttered, loud enough for the nearby privates to hear, "you reckon you'll hit the broadside of a barn today? Or are we sticking to your usual, spraying rounds like it's a bleeding fireworks display?" A few chuckles rippled through the group, the kind that died quickly under Wilkins' glare, but lingered in the air like smoke. Elena didn't flinch. She simply adjusted the bipod on her L115A3 sniper rifle, the long-barreled beast assigned to her for the exercise, and replied, "I'll manage, Lance Corporal." Her voice was flat, reserved, the words delivered without heat or invitation for more. The crack in discipline came subtly, as these things often did in the ranks. They had moved to the sniper lane, an elevated mound overlooking the targets, where the wind howled fiercer off the estuary. The platoon was paired off for spotting duties, and Davies, drawing lots as section lead, assigned Elena to the furthest position, an exposed spot where the gusts could toy with a round's trajectory, like a cat with a mouse. "You'll do fine there, love," he said, smirking as he handed her the spotter's scope. "Just don't let the breeze knock you over." The others shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting away, but no one spoke up. It was the way of things, hierarchy observed, pecking order enforced through barbs rather than blows. Elena took the position without protest, settling into the prone with the methodical care of someone who had done this 100 times before. Her breathing slowed, matching the rise and fall of the dunes beyond. From the observation post, Captain Reynolds watched the setup unfold. He was a staff officer from Aldershot, here to oversee the training as part of a broader assessment for marksmanship quals. Tall and spare, with the quiet authority of a man who had seen service in shadowed corners of the world, he adjusted his binoculars against the drizzle, spotting the lenses. "Steady, bunch," he murmured to his adjutant, a young lieutenant fresh from Sandhurst. "Though that one's got the short straw." He nodded towards Elena, who was now zeroing her scope, her form still as a statue amid the gathering clouds. The lieutenant shrugged. "Hargrove, she's solid enough. Just keeps her head down." As the first string of shots echoed across the range, crack after measured crack, the morning's routine settled into its groove. Targets flipped up at random intervals, steel silhouettes against the grey, and the platoon responded with the disciplined fire of professionals. But beneath the surface, the injustice festered quietly. Davies, taking his turn at 600 meters, scored clean hits, earning nods from Wilkins. Elena waited her rotation, the wind tugging at her hood, her focus unbroken. No one noticed the faint tattoo peeking from beneath her sleeve as she rolled it up, a coiled serpent. Inked in black, the mark of something deeper, something classified. Not yet. The rain began in earnest then, pattering on the hides and turning the paths to mud. Wilkins called a brief halt for adjustments, and as the soldiers huddled under ponchos, Davies leaned in close to Elena once more. "Bet you wish you were back in signals, eh? Pushing papers instead of pretending at this." His hand shot out, grabbing her sleeve to yank it mockingly, as if to expose her inadequacy. The fabric tore slightly at the seam, but Elena's expression remained impassive, her eyes meeting his for a fraction of a second, steady, unyielding, before she pulled away with measured calm. Silence followed, thick as the mist rolling in from the sea. In that moment, the routine cracked. Just enough to let the tension seep through. No one expected it to matter. Not yet. But in the quiet professionalism of the British Army, such moments had a way of echoing farther than the report of a rifle. The rain drummed steadily on the canvas hides, turning the firing points into sodden islands amid the churned earth of the range. Private Eleanor Hargrove remained prone, her cheek welded to the stock of the L-115A3. The sniper rifle's cold metal, a familiar anchor against the chill seeping through her damp smock. She adjusted her scope with infinitesimal precision, the wind's whine a constant companion as it gusted in from the English Channel, carrying the distant cry of gulls. Around her, the platoon regrouped under Sergeant Major Wilkins' barked commands, the hierarchy reasserting itself like the relentless tide. "Form up, you lot. No slacking in this weather. It's character building, this is." His voice, gravelly from years of parade ground addresses, brooked no argument. Wilkins, with his campaign medals pinned discreetly to his tunic, embodied the unyielding spine of the British Army. A sergeant major who had risen through the ranks from a private in the Welsh Guards, his authority earned not in fanfare, but in the quiet grind of daily drills. Elena rose slowly, folding her bipod with the economical movements of someone who wasted no energy on theatrics. She slung the rifle over her shoulder, the weight settling against her back like an old friend, and fell in with her section as they trudged back to the assembly area. The path was a quagmire now, boots sucking at the mud with each step, the air thick with the scent of wet wool and oiled steel. Lance Corporal Davies walked ahead, his posture straight, but his glance back at her laced with that familiar smirk. The sleeve grab already dismissed in his mind as just another jab in the endless rhythm of section banter. He was typical of the mid-ranks, ambitious, sharp-tongued, using humor as a blunt instrument to maintain his place. "Keep up, Hargrove," he called over his shoulder, his Newcastle lilt cutting through the downpour. "Wouldn't want you getting lost in the fog, though it'd save us the ammo." The others in the section, privates like young Ellis from Manchester, barely out of his teens, and Corporal Hale, a steady hand from the Midlands, exchanged glances but said nothing. It was the order of things. Respect the chain of command, endure the pecking, prove yourself in action rather than words. Elena's response was silence, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the targets stood like silent sentinels, blurred by the sheeting rain. She had learned early in her service that words invited escalation. Competence spoke louder, if only to those who listened. Transferred to the Fusiliers after a stint in signals at Catterick, she had adapted to the infantry's rough edges, with the same quiet resolve that had seen her through the rigors of Phase 1 training. Her file noted her as proficient in reconnaissance and observation, skills honed in the shadowed classrooms of electronic warfare, but here on the open ranges, she was just another rifle in the line underestimated because she chose not to shine. Back at the assembly pads, the routine resumed with mechanical efficiency. Wilkins oversaw the equipment inspection, his eyes missing nothing as he paced the line. Rifles out, magazines empty. Check your zeros. Last thing we need is a round going astray into France. The platoon complied, the clatter of bolts cycling and scopes being wiped down punctuating the steady patter of rain. Captain Reynolds, from his vantage in the observation post, jotted notes in his waterproof pad, his adjutant at his side. Reynolds was a product of the system, commissioned from Cranfield, with deployments to Cyprus and the Falklands under his belt. He valued the subtle cues of discipline over overt displays. Solid form, he observed to the lieutenant, binoculars trained on the group. Though that section led Davies, could do with toning down the theatrics. Distraction in the ranks breeds error. Eleanor knelt to her kit, methodically unpacking the cleaning rod and bore snake, her movements precise despite the water dripping from her cap peak. Hale, her fire team partner, crouched nearby, his own rifle disassembled on a ground sheet. A solid man in his 30s, with the faint lines of fatigue from family life back in Birmingham, he offered a nod of quiet solidarity. "Wind's a bugger today," he muttered, keeping his voice low. "You'll thread it true, though." It was as close to encouragement as the ranks allowed, no effusive praise, just the understated acknowledgement of shared burden. Elena met his eyes briefly, a flicker of gratitude in her steady gaze, before returning to her task. She had scored consistently in quals, her groups tight even under simulated stress, but such details rarely surfaced in mess hall chatter. To most, she was the quiet one from the signals lot, competent enough to spot but not to lead the shot. As the inspection wrapped, Wilkins called for a brief stand easy, the platoon huddling under the overhang of a nearby ammo hut. The structure, a utilitarian prefab from the post-war era, smelled of damp concrete and brass casings, its walls scarred from decades of use. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the aroma of instant coffee brewing on a portable stove. Davies claimed a spot by the heater, drawing the younger privates into his orbit with tales of his last exercise in Brecon. "Aye, proper beast it was, up to the top in horizontal rain, no kit failures on my watch." His eyes slid to Elena, who stood apart, sipping from her canteen. "Unlike some, who treat it like a day out." A ripple of laughter, subdued by the sergeant's proximity, but it stung all the same. Elena's posture remained erect, her free hand resting lightly on her rifle case, betraying no reaction. Internally, the barbs glanced off the armor of her resolve, built from years of proving herself in quieter arenas, nights poring over signals intercepts, the isolation of forward observation posts where one wrong reading could cost lives. From the hut's edge, Major Ellis, Wilkins's superior, a tall figure with the clipped demeanor of a Staff College graduate, surveyed the group. He had arrived mid-morning from Tidworth, his visit part of the battalion's annual assessment cycle. "Carry on, Sergeant Major," he said, his tone even, before turning to Reynolds for a quiet word. The Major represented the higher echelons, decisions made in oak-panelled offices at the Ministry, filtered down through layers of protocol. Yet even he noted the undercurrents, the way Elena held herself with a discipline that bordered on the invisible. "That private there, Hargrove, any notes?" Reynolds shook his head. "Keeps her counsel. Reliable from what I see." The stand easy ended abruptly as Wilkins blew his whistle, the shrill note slicing through the rain. "Back to it. Next string at 700 meters, spotters front." The platoon moved out, boots echoing on the wet concrete as they dispersed to their positions. Elena took her place again, the wind tugging at her hood like an insistent hand. Davies assigned the pairs with a casual flick of his roster, placing her with Ellis on spotting. "Eyes sharp, lads, and lass," he added, the word laced with just enough edge to draw a snicker from Hale. She settled in, the bipod digging into the soft ground, her breathing syncing with the rise and fall of the range. Competence was her currency, silent and unyielding, forged in the reserved heart of British service. No one questioned it yet. The order held firm, the rain washing away the morning's tensions like footprints in the mud. But in the quiet intervals between commands, Eleanor's mind turned to the scar on her jaw, the tattoo hidden beneath her cuff, a remnant of a past that whispered of more than signals and routine. The range stretched before her, targets waiting in the grey, and for now that was enough. The afternoon wore on under a sky that refused to lift, the rain now a persistent drizzle that beaded on every surface like reluctant jewels. The platoon had advanced to the 700-metre line, the targets reduced to distant specks against the hazy dunes, where the sea's murmur blended with the occasional crack of suppressed fire from adjacent lanes. Private Elena Hargrove lay prone once more, her body aligned with the rifle's barrel, the earth cool and yielding beneath her elbows. She exhaled slowly, the crosshairs settling on the silhouette that flipped up without warning, a fleeting shadow in the grey. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, the wind's shift calculated in the subtle twist of her adjustments. Around her the section waited in disciplined hush. Corporal Hale on the spotter's scope, murmuring wind calls in a low monotone. "Left 2, hold steady." Lance Corporal Davies paced the rear of the firing point, his role as section lead affording him the luxury of oversight rather than the grind of the prone. He had taken to it with the casual authority of one who thrived on the edges of protocol, his boots scuffing the mud as he inspected the others' positions. "Eyes on, Hale. None of that Mancunian daydreaming," he said, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry. Hale grunted an acknowledgement, his focus unbroken. Davies' gaze lingered on Elena, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth as he crouched beside her, ostensibly to check her form. "Scope's a bit off, isn't it, Hargrove? Or is that just the wind playing tricks on you again?" The words were delivered with the false camaraderie of the ranks, but the undertone was sharp, designed to unsettle before the shot. Elena didn't respond, her cheek pressed firm against the stock, the world narrowed to the mill dots in her sight picture. She had zeroed the rifle earlier under Wilkins's watchful eye, the groups clustering tight at 500 meters despite the gusts. Competence like hers didn't demand explanation. It simply existed, a quiet constant amid the platoon's flux. But Davies pressed on, his hand reaching out to tap her shoulder, then gripping the cuff of her sleeve, yanking it upward as if to expose some flaw in her grip. "Loosen up, love. You're holding it like it's your first time at the range." The fabric strained. The faint edge of her tattoo, a coiled serpent, black and unadorned, flashing briefly before she steadied her arm. A snicker escaped from Private Ellis, positioned nearby, the sound swallowed quickly by the wind but echoing in the shared silence that followed. Sergeant Major Wilkins, stationed at the control point some 50 meters back, caught the exchange from the corner of his eye. His posture stiffened, the lines of his face deepening under the brim of his cap, but he said nothing. Discipline in the British Army was a layered thing, overt correction for the blatant, subtle correction for the insidious. A public rebuke now would only amplify the undercurrent, turning banter into spectacle. Instead he called out evenly, "Firing point ready? Confirm." Hale responded with a crisp, "Affirmative, Sergeant Major," and Elena squeezed the trigger. The report was a sharp whip crack, muffled by the suppressor's hush, the round arcing through the damp air to strike the target's center mass. A distant clang confirmed the hit, the silhouette shuddering before dropping. Davies released her sleeve with a feigned chuckle, straightening up as if the moment had been inconsequential. "Lucky shot. Try not to spray the rest." He moved off to the next position, leaving the faint tear in her cuff as a reminder, the rain seeping into the seam. Elena reloaded methodically, her expression unchanging, the internal churn contained behind eyes that betrayed only focus. She had endured similar in signals training, jabs at her precision with comms gear, dismissed as backroom work, unfit for the front line. Here, on the exposed ranges of Lydd, it felt sharper, the hierarchy's weight pressing like the low clouds. Yet silence was her shield. Retaliation would fracture the order she respected, the quiet professionalism that bound the ranks. The string continued, targets popping in erratic sequence, the platoon's fire a measured cadence against the storm's murmur. Elena's turns came at intervals, each shot threading the wind with the same unerring calm, 2 more hits at 700, the clangs punctuating the grey like affirmations. Hale noted them softly. Clean. Wind holding. But as the exercise shifted to grouped fire, Davies orchestrated the next injustice with the precision of a man who knew the blind spots in oversight. He assigned Elena to a paired shot with Ellis, the young private's nerves evident in his fidgeting hands. Spot for him, Hargrove. Make sure he doesn't miss and blame the breeze. Ellis took the prone, his setup hasty under Davies' impatient gaze, the bipod legs sinking unevenly into the mud. As Ellis fired, wide by a meter, the round kicking up dirt short of the target, Davies interjected before the spotter could call it. "What was that, Ellis? And you, Hargrove? Where's the wind-call? Too busy daydreaming?" He stepped forward, his boot nudging Eleanor's ground sheet deliberately, scattering a few loose rounds into the muck. The action was subtle, masked as adjustment, but it forced her to scramble, her gloved fingers retrieving the brass amid the downpour. Public now, with the section watching and Wilkins too distant to intervene immediately, the humiliation landed like a poorly aimed round. Ellis flushed, mumbling an apology, but Davies waved it off. "See, even the spotter's off. Pick it up or we'll be here till dusk." Elena gathered the rounds without a word, her posture rigid, the rain tracing cold paths down her neck. Internally, the sting registered, not the mud on her hands, but the erosion of trust in the chain, the way competence was undermined by petty command. She had seen it before, in the isolated posts of her signals days, where a missed intercept could be spun as oversight. But here, with the rifle's weight beside her, it tested the reserves of her restraint. She reset the ground sheet, resuming her spotter role with the same measured poise, her voice steady as she called the next adjustment. "Right one, drop half." Ellis fired again, closer this time, the clang a small vindication. From the observation post, Captain Reynolds lowered his binoculars, a faint crease forming between his brows. "That section's cohesion is fraying," he said to his adjutant, the lieutenant nodding in agreement. The wind carried fragments of the exchange, the hierarchy's rigid lines bending just enough to notice. Major Ellis, conferring nearby, made a note in his log, his expression impassive. The routine demanded endurance. Violations like this were the grit in the machine, smoothed over by time or transfer. Yet in Elena's silence there was a depth unspoken, her scar and tattoo mere hints of a history that lingered like the cordite's aftertaste. As the string concluded, Wilkins called ceasefire, the platoon rising stiffly from the prone joints protesting the chill. They trudged back toward the assembly area, the path slick with runoff, boots echoing in uneven rhythm. Davies fell in beside Hale, resuming his commentary as if the moments had evaporated. "Told you she'd drag the score. Still, keeps things lively." The words hung in the air, met with subdued nods, the injustice woven into the fabric of the day. Elena walked at the rear, rifle slung secure, her gaze on the fading light over the estuary. The order held, brittle but intact, the rain washing the range clean for the next rotation. No one spoke of it further. In the reserved world of British service, such tests were borne quietly, their echoes waiting for the right wind to carry them. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The drizzle had thickened into a fine mist by mid-afternoon, cloaking the ranges at Lydd, in a veil that softened the edges of the dunes and muted the distant crash of waves against the shingle. The platoon had regrouped at the assembly pads, the concrete slick underfoot, where puddles reflected the leaden sky like fractured mirrors. Private Elena Hargrove stood at ease with the others, her rifle case propped against her leg, the faint tear in her sleeve cuff now concealed beneath a fresh layer of damp fabric. She wiped condensation from her scope lens with a gloved thumb, her movements deliberate, betraying none of the morning's accumulated weight. Around her the section shook off the chill, breaths visible in the cooling air, the scent of wet earth mingling with the oily tang of gun lubricant. Sergeant Major Wilkins paced the line, his boots striking the pads with rhythmic authority, clipboard in hand, as he tallied scores from the string. "Decent enough, but room for tightening. Hale, Ellis, watch those wind calls. Davies, keep the section sharp, no distractions." His gaze swept over them, lingering a fraction longer on Eleanor, though his expression remained neutral, the lines of his face etched by years under similar skies, from the sodden fields of Zenelager to the relentless downpours of Otterburn. Wilkins embodied the army's quiet backbone, a man who enforced order not through thunder, but through the steady pressure of expectation. Davies nodded crisply, his earlier barbs folded away like a map after navigation, though the smirk lingered in his eyes as he adjusted his beret. The routine was poised to resume, another rotation at 800 meters, the long-range challenge that separated proficiency from precision. When a low rumble cut through the mist, a pair of Land Rovers emerged from the coastal track, their tires churning mud as they pulled up to the observation post. The vehicles bore no overt markings, just the subdued green of ministry issue, but the occupants carried an aura that stilled the platoon without a word. Out stepped a small cadre, 4 men in unmarked combat dress, their postures erect yet unhurried, faces weathered by service in places unspoken. Leading them was Major Harlan Thorpe, SAS, his frame lean and unassuming, the winged dagger insignia discreet on his shoulder. Flanking him were 2 sergeants, veterans of the regiment, their eyes scanning the range with the economy of those who assessed threats in glances, and a civilian in a wax jacket, likely an assessor from the Defense Intelligence Staff. Captain Reynolds straightened from his post, extending a hand to Thorpe with the measured respect due a brother officer from the shadowed echelons. "Major, good of you to join us. We're midway through Qualls. Long range today." Thorpe's handshake was firm but brief, his response a nod and a low Reynolds, delivered in the clipped tones of a Hereford accent, honed in the quiet halls of Sterling lines. No pleasantries, no elaboration. The SAS operated on necessity. Their presence here a courtesy nod to inter-service liaison, ostensibly to observe sniper protocols for a joint exercise brief. But in the ranks, such visits carried weight, whispers of classified exchanges, of skills shared in the veiled world beyond standard army life. The platoon formed up instinctively as Wilkins called attention, the snap of heels echoing across the pads like a single report. Thorpe's group moved to the edge of the assembly, positioning themselves with the stillness of observers who blended into the landscape. They said little, their silence a presence unto itself, eyes tracing the lines of rifles and the subtle cues of discipline. Eleanor, slotted back into her section, felt the shift without looking, the way the air tightened, the younger privates straightening fractions more under unseen scrutiny. She resumed her equipment check, unfolding the cleaning kit on a ground sheet, her fingers working the bore snake through the barrel with fluid precision, the mist beaded on her smock tracing cold paths down her arms, but her focus held steady, internal rhythms unbroken. Davies, ever the adapter, seized the moment to reassert his lead. "Right, section. Kit inspection before the next string. Hargrove, you're on the 800 with Ellis again. Spot clean, no repeats from earlier." His voice carried just enough deference to the visitors, pitched low as if to demonstrate command under observation. The others complied, the clatter of metal subdued, but Thorpe's sergeant, a broad-shouldered man named Kerr with faint scars tracing his knuckles, tilted his head slightly, his gaze settling on Elena's position. It was a fleeting thing, unnoticed by most, the way she aligned her tools in exact rows, the efficiency born not of rote but of ingrained habit, the kind forged in prolonged isolation. As the group dispersed to the firing points, the mist parting briefly to reveal the extended range, Thorpe conferred quietly with Reynolds. "Your snipers. Any standouts?" Reynolds hesitated, glancing at his notes. "Solid across the board. Hargrove there. She's consistent, keeps it tight." Thorpe's eyes followed the direction, watching as Elena trudged to her mound, the rifle case slung low. She settled prone without flourish, bipod extending into the yielding sand, her body merging with the terrain like a natural extension. Kerr murmured something to his companion, too low for the wind to carry, but their postures shifted. A subtle relaxation in the shoulders, the stillness of recognition rather than mere appraisal. The first targets flipped at 800 meters, steel ghosts in the haze, and the platoon opened fire in controlled bursts. Eleanor's turn came midway, Ellis on the spotter now, his calls tentative under the weight of eyes. "Wind left 3, hold full value." She adjusted the elevation turret with a faint click, audible only to her, the crosshairs dancing briefly before steadying. The shot broke clean, the distant clang reverberating through the mist like a bell in fog. Thorpe, binoculars raised from the post, lowered them slowly, his expression unchanging but for a fractional narrowing of his gaze. Another target rose, erratic in the gusts, and Elena's follow-up threaded the air, hit, center mass. The third came rapid, a simulated stress sequence, the silhouette weaving as if evading. Her breathing cycled even, the trigger pull seamless. Clang, clang. Kerr exchanged a glance with Thorpe, the communication wordless, a shared memory surfacing in the set of their jaws. It was the tattoo they had glimpsed earlier, during the sleeve adjustment, a coiled serpent, the mark of a joint operation in the Hindu Kush, inked post-mission for those who had pulled shadows from the wire. Eleanor had been there, not as infantry, but as the ghost in the signals net, her intercepts threading the needle that saved a patrol from ambush. Classified, buried in redacted files at Credenhill, her role reduced to support asset in the official logs. But the regiment remembered. They marked their own in silence. From the firing point, Davies called the hits with grudging accuracy. Clean string, but his tone edged with surprise, the earlier mockery curdling unspoken. Elena rose, collapsing her bipod, her gaze meeting the distant figures only once, a brief lock with Thorpe's, steady and unblinking, before she turned away. No words passed. Respect in the SAS was a currency of stillness, earned in the quiet spaces between operations. The mist closed in again as the platoon rotated back, the visitors lingering at the post, their presence now a subtle anchor amid the routine. Wilkins noted it in passing, his log updated with a neutral entry, but the undercurrent stirred, the hidden past brushing against the present like fog against the dunes. No one spoke of it yet. In the reserved cadence of British service, observation preceded revelation, the wind carrying hints to those who knew how to listen. The mist hung heavy over the ranges at Lydd, turning the air into a tangible chill that seeped through the seams of every smock and beret. The platoon had just completed the 800-meter string, the final clangs of steel targets still echoing faintly against the dunes, where the sea's low roar provided a constant, indifferent underscore. Private Elena Hargrove rose from her prone position with the same unhurried grace that had marked her throughout the day, collapsing the bipod of her L115A3 and slinging the rifle across her back. Her gloved hands brushed mud from her elbows, the motion automatic, her face impassive beneath the brim of her cap. The 3 clean hits, each one threading the erratic wind without deviation, had drawn no overt reaction from her section, only the subdued mutter of confirmation from Ellis on the spotter. "All center," he said, his voice low, as if acknowledging a fact rather than a feat. Lance Corporal Davies, standing a few paces back, folded his arms across his chest, his earlier smirk tempered by the precision he couldn't quite dismiss. "Not bad, Hargrove," he conceded, the words clipped, laced with the reluctance of one whose authority had been quietly upstaged. Must be the luck of the signals lot rubbing off. The section shifted uneasily, Hale offering a nod of quiet approval, while young Ellis avoided eye contact. The scattered rounds from earlier still fresh in his mind. Sergeant Major Wilkins, clipboard in hand, tallied the scores from the control point, his gravelly voice cutting through the haze. "String complete. Form up for debrief. 800 hold steady, but watch those gusts off the estuary." The platoon complied, boots scraping on the wet sand as they trudged back toward the assembly pads, the mist swirling around their legs like reluctant smoke. Major Harlan Thorpe and his SAS cadre remained at the observation post, their presence a subtle weight on the proceedings. Thorpe, his lean frame unmoved by the damp, lowered his binoculars with deliberate care, passing them to Sergeant Kerr without a word. The exchange was seamless, a language of glances honed in the austere confines of Hereford's training grounds, where words were rationed like ammunition. Reynolds approached, his staff officers' poise intact despite the weather. "Impressive work on that last sequence, Major. Your thoughts?" Thorpe's response was measured, his Hereford burr subdued. "Thorough. The wind's a leveler, shows the grain." But his eyes, sharp beneath hooded brows, lingered on Elena as she fell into line, the faint outline of the serpent tattoo now hidden once more beneath her cuff, mended hastily with a field knot during the rotation. The debrief unfolded under the overhang of the ammo hut, the platoon arrayed in loose ranks, rifles grounded at their feet. Wilkins took the lead, his voice steady against the patter of drizzle on the canvas. Hits averaged 80%, decent for these conditions. Davies, your section pulled through, but cohesion's key. No room for lapses. Davies stood taller, acknowledging with a crisp, "Understood, Sergeant Major," though his glance toward Elena carried a residue of the morning's barbs. The air held a brittle calm, the mist diffusing the harsh lines of the prefab structure, its walls scarred by years of salt and exposure. Inside the hut, the faint aroma of reheated rations lingered, a reminder of the mess hall's distant comforts. But here, discipline reigned, internal and unspoken. It was then, as Wilkins wrapped his notes, that Thorpe stepped forward from the post, his movement drawing every eye without effort. The SAS major's boots struck the concrete with quiet authority, the sound muffled by the wet ground, yet it commanded attention like the snap of a bolt carrier. Reynolds deferred with a subtle shift, allowing Thorpe the floor, an unspoken protocol in the presence of the regiment. Thorpe's gaze swept the platoon, settling not on the leads or the veterans, but on Elena, positioned at the rear of her section. The silence stretched, thick as the fog rolling in from the channel, broken only by the distant call of a gull. "No one can make that shot," Thorpe said at last, his voice even, carrying the weight of observation rather than accusation. The words hung in the mist, drawing furrowed brows from Wilkins and a puzzled tilt from Davies. Thorpe paused, his posture erect, hands clasped behind his back in the parade stance of a man who had stood sentinel in far less forgiving terrains, from the jagged peaks of Afghanistan to the shadowed streets of Belfast. Not in this wind, not 3 for 3 at 800, clean through the shifts. Not unless you've threaded worse before. The platoon stirred faintly, a ripple of confusion passing through the ranks. Hale's eyes narrowed, Ellis shifted his weight, and Davies' smirk faltered, replaced by a guarded stare. Eleanor met Thorpe's gaze directly for the first time that day, her own steady, betraying nothing of the internal pause, the flicker of recognition that surfaced like a submerged current. Thorpe continued, his tone reserved, each word measured as if drawn from a classified brief. "That mark on your arm, Private Hargrove, the serpent, not many carry it, fewer still earn it." A hush fell, absolute and profound, the kind that settled over a drill square at Credenhill in the pre-dawn quiet. Wilkins' clipboard lowered slowly, his expression unchanging but for the subtle tightening of his jaw. The tattoo, glimpsed earlier in the scuffle, dismissed as some personal ink, now loomed in the collective mind, its significance unfolding like a withheld order. Thorpe's voice remained low, pitched for the group yet intimate in its precision. "Operation Shadow Wire, Hindu Kush 109. Intercepts pulled a patrol from the wire. 4 of us, including Kerr here. Ghost in the net, they called you. Support asset, the files say, but we know better." Kerr nodded once, his scarred knuckles flexing imperceptibly, the affirmation silent but ironclad. The regiment's respect was not bestowed in fanfare. It was etched in stillness, in the shared burden of missions redacted from public record. Elena's past, buried after her transfer from signals, her role reduced to routine in the orderly room, surfaced here, public and unyielding. She had been the unseen thread, decoding fragments in a forward OP under fire, her calls guiding the extraction that saved lives without credit or ceremony. No medals pinned in the light of day, only the ink shared among survivors, a mark of quiet alliance. Davies' face drained of color, his arms unfolding as the weight of his earlier jabs settled like lead. The section froze, Hale's nod deepening into something akin to reverence, Ellis's eyes widening in the dawning realization. Shame spread through the ranks, not in outbursts but in the averted gazes, the subtle shifts in posture, the rigid hierarchy bending under the truth of overlooked competence. Wilkins stood at attention, his voice absent, the debrief forgotten. Thorpe raised his hand in a salute, slow and deliberate, the gesture mirrored by Kerr and the other sergeant. It was no flourish, no Hollywood salute, but a pause in the mist, a recognition that commanded the air. Elena returned it crisply, her eyes locking with Thorpe's for a beat longer, gratitude unspoken, dignity intact. The platoon held the moment, the cold air over the ranges carrying the echo of what had been hidden. Respect rose then, quiet and transformative, weaving through the silence like the wind's final sigh. No apologies were voiced. In the reserved ethos of British service, the reckoning spoke for itself. The mist began to lift slightly, revealing the dunes beyond, as the routine waited, irrevocably altered. The mist clung to the assembly pads like a shroud, the drizzle resuming its soft patter on the concrete as the salute hung in the air, suspended between Major Thorpe and Private Elena Hargrove. Thorpe's arm lowered slowly, his posture remaining at rigid attention, the winged dagger on his shoulder, catching a fleeting glint from the diffused light filtering through the clouds. Sergeant Kerr and his counterpart mirrored the stance, their stillness a testament to the unspoken code of the regiment, respect rendered not in volume, but in the weight of immobility. The platoon stood frozen, the usual shuffle of boots and murmur of debrief notes silenced into an absolute hush, broken only by the distant sigh of the wind over the dunes. Wilkins, the sergeant major's clipboard now forgotten at his side, felt the shift ripple through his ranks like a fault line in the parade square. His eyes, hardened by decades of enforcing order from Tidworth to the training moors of Sennybridge, fixed on Elena with a new clarity. The morning's routine, roll call at dawn, the equipment checks under the relentless Kent sky, had masked her as just another in the line, competent but unremarkable. Now, the revelation settled over him, the pieces aligning. Her precision in the prone, the unyielding calm amid Davy's barbs. No words escaped him. In the British Army's reserved hierarchy, acknowledgement came through posture, the subtle straightening of his spine as he assumed attention beside her section. Davies, positioned at the front of his group, felt the shame creep in like the cold seeping from the wet ground. His arms, once folded in casual oversight, now hung limp. The smirk long evaporated from his face. The sleeve grab earlier that morning, the scattered rounds in the mud, the jabs at her signals background, they replayed internally, each one a misstep in the rigid ladder of command. He had enforced the pecking order with the blunt tools of banter, assuming her silence as weakness, rather than the quiet fortitude it masked. Now, under Thorpe's even gaze, the platoon's eyes turned inward, the younger privates like Ellis shifting uncomfortably, their earlier chuckles curdling into regret. Hale, ever the steady hand, met Elena's profile with a nod so slight it might have been the wind, his own respect deepening into something profound, unspoken. Thorpe broke the silence first, his voice low and measured, carrying the clipped precision of a man who briefed in shadowed rooms at Credenhill. "Ghostwire," he said, the old call sign dropping like a classified dispatch, known only to those who had walked the wire in the Hindu Kush. Elena's breath caught fractionally, the sound lost to the mist, but her eyes held his, steady, acknowledging the echo of that night in '09, when her intercepts had unraveled the ambush, guiding the patrol through the dark with fragments of encrypted chatter. No heroics in the telling. The regiment didn't trade in embellishment. "You pulled us clear when the net went dark. Kerr owes you a pint in the sergeant's mess still." Kerr's lips twitched in the barest hint of a smile, his scarred hands clasping behind his back, the gesture affirming the debt without fanfare. The civilian assessor, standing a pace behind Thorpe, jotted a note in his waterproof pad, his expression neutral, but the weight of institutional recognition settled over the group. Reynolds, the staff officer from Aldershot, cleared his throat softly, his adjutant's eyes widening in the periphery. This was no mere observation visit. Thorpe's cadre had come for protocols, but the moment transcended, bridging the visible ranks with the veiled operations of intelligence and special forces. Major Ellis, who had arrived from Tidworth earlier, stepped forward now, his staff college poise unbroken. "Private Hargrove," he said, his tone even, addressing her directly for the first time that day. "Your service extends beyond these ranges. The battalion's records will reflect it. It was reform in motion, subtle, procedural, the promise of updated files. Perhaps a quiet commendation slipped into her dossier, ensuring her competence was no longer overlooked in the chain. Eleanor stood at attention, her rifle case grounded beside her, the L-115A3's barrel still warm from the string. Internally, the tension uncoiled like the serpent inked on her arm. The scar along her jaw a faint reminder of the forward OP's confines, where the air had tasted of dust and fear. She had chosen silence upon transfer, burying the classified past to serve in the line, proving worth through action rather than anecdote. No plea for recognition. British restraint demanded endurance, the moral courage to bear injustice until the moment demanded otherwise. Her response was a crisp, "Sir," delivered without flourish, her gaze forward now, posture unyielding amid the chill. The freeze extended, the platoon holding position as if on the drill square at dawn, the cold air over Lydd's yards pressing down with the gravity of the unspoken. Shame spread not in accusations, but in the averted eyes of the section, Davies's shoulders slumping imperceptibly, Ellis's flush deepening under his cap. It was the quiet dignity of reform. No public dressing down, no melodrama, just the transformative hush where hierarchy realigned. Respect rose then, weaving through the ranks like the mist lifting from the estuary, evident in Wilkins' nod to Thorpe, in Hale's steady presence beside her. The visitors lingered a moment longer, their stillness a bridge to the hidden legacy, before Thorpe inclined his head, a final acknowledgement, and turned toward the Land Rovers, his cadre following without haste. As the engines rumbled to life, the platoon exhaled collectively, the routine resuming with a new undercurrent. Wilkins called them to stand easy, his voice gravelly but tempered. "Kit down, debrief in 5. Boots scraped softly, the clink of equipment subdued. But glances toward Elena carried a different weight now. Curiosity laced with deference, the mockery evaporated like morning fog. She knelt to her ground sheet, resuming the cleaning with the same methodical care, her internal reserve intact. In the quiet professionalism of British service, such recognitions reshaped the order not through thunder, but through the silent honor of those who served unseen, their courage etched in the rain-slicked earth of places like Lydd. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Elena Hargrove reach those who still believe in honor. The days following the revelation at Lydd settled into the platoon like the persistent damp that lingered in the barracks at Tidworth, seeping into every corner without fanfare. Private Elena Hargrove returned to the routine with the same unassuming stride that had marked her arrival 3 years prior, her kit bag slung over one shoulder as the bus rumbled back from the Kent ranges under a sky still heavy with autumn cloud. The journey was quiet, the usual banter subdued to murmurs, the clatter of rifles secured in racks punctuating the engine's hum. No one approached her directly. In the reserved compartments of British service, such shifts were absorbed internally, expressed through the absence of barbs rather than overt gestures. Sergeant Major Wilkins, seated near the front with his clipboard balanced on a knee, glanced back once during the drive, his gravelly voice issuing a general order. "Kit check on arrival. Debrief at 1800 sharp, no excuses." His eyes met Elena's briefly in the reflection of the rain-streaked window, a nod so subtle it might have been the sway of the vehicle. Wilkins had seen transformations before, in the aftermath of tours where quiet competence emerged from the shadows, but this one carried the weight of the regiment's endorsement, a ripple that would filter through the battalion's veins like an unlogged commendation. He made no mention of it in the orderly room that evening. Instead, he updated her file himself, appending a note on exemplary precision under variable conditions, the words dry and procedural, yet laced with the institutional respect that would shield her from future slights. Back in the block, the section dispersed to their bays, the air thick with the scent of damp wool and boiled cabbage wafting from the cookhouse. Lance Corporal Davies unpacked his gear in silence, his usual post-exercise recounting absent as he stowed his SA-80 in the rack. The smirk that had defined his oversight of Elena evaporated entirely, replaced by a guarded deference that manifested in small ways. Handing her a cleaning cloth during the communal inspection without comment, his Geordie lilt clipped to essentials. "Pass the oil," he said once, the request neutral, devoid of the earlier edge. Shame had rooted deeply in him, Not as remorse voiced in the mess, but as a recalibration of the pecking order, the hierarchy's rigid lines redrawn by Thorpe's words. He avoided her gaze in the following drills, his commands to the section now inclusive, the jabs at her signals background buried like a misfired round. Corporal Hale, ever the anchor of the fire team, offered the first quiet bridge. As they squared away the bay that night, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead casting long shadows on the linoleum, he paused by her bunk. "Solid work out there," he murmured, his Midlands accent steady, the praise understated as a shared glance over tea in the nafi. Elena nodded, folding her smock with precise creases, her response a simple, "Cheers." No elaboration. Vulnerability in the ranks was contained, expressed through the reliability of routine. Hale's respect had always been present, but now it deepened, evident in the way he deferred to her wind calls during the next morning's dry fire practice on the square, his spotter's scope aligned without question. Young Private Ellis, still green from Catterick, embodied the broader shift among the juniors. The scattered rounds in the mud at Lydd haunted him less as personal failing now, overshadowed by the awe of Elena's hidden legacy. In the mess hall that evening, as the platoon queued for shepherd's pie under the low ceilings of the dining room, he sidled up beside her, tray in hand. That shot sequence, proper threading the needle that was. His voice was low, admiration couched in the slang of youth, but his eyes held the wide respect of one who had glimpsed the unseen layers of service. Elena's reply was reserved, a faint team effort, but the exchange marked her assent. No longer the quiet transfer from signals, but a figure whispered about in the bays after lights out. "Heard she's got ink from a real op," Ellis confided to a mate later, the tale spreading not as gossip but as legend, honed in the quiet hours when boots were polished and letters home written. The transformation extended beyond the section, weaving through the battalion like the cold air over Aldershot's training yards. Captain Reynolds, in his after-action report, dispatched to the brigade HQ, included a footnote on inter-service observation outcomes, the phrasing oblique but sufficient to elevate Elena's profile in the personnel reviews. Major Ellis followed suit, his staff college precision ensuring her calls were flagged for advanced sniper cadre consideration, quiet reform, procedural and unheralded, aligning her competence with opportunities once overlooked. In the drill square the next dawn, as the platoon formed up under Wilkins' whistle, the ranks adjusted subtly. Eleanor slotted into lead spotter without protest from Davies, her posture drawing nods from the flanks. The boots echoed in unison, striking the wet concrete with the disciplined rhythm of Hereford's parade grounds. But the undercurrent had changed. No mockery laced the sergeant's calls, only the clipped efficiency of professionals who now saw the full measure of one among them. Elena herself navigated the shift internally, her scar along the jaw a private talisman as she lay prone during the afternoon's simulated patrols across the Tidworth Plains. The wind here was gentler than Lydd's estuary gusts, carrying the earthy scent of chalk downs rather than salt. But the focus remained the same, breath-controlled sight picture steady. The revelation had lifted a weight she hadn't named, the isolation of her classified past, the serpent tattoo a solitary mark beneath her cuff, but it brought no outward alteration. She served as before, silent competence her hallmark, moral courage etched in the endurance of injustice now past. In the evenings, alone with her signals manuals borrowed from the education centre, she reflected on the Hindu Kush op, not with pride, but with the reserved gratitude of survival, the call sign Ghostwire, an echo that bound her to the regiment's veiled honour. Whispers changed gradually, evolving from sidelong doubts to tales of quiet legend. Hargrove pulled shadows from the wire, murmured in the smokers' huddle outside the gym, the words carrying the reverence of shared service. No one mocked her now. The barbs had dissolved in the mist of that afternoon, replaced by the subtle deference of eye contact held a beat longer, a place yielded at the table. Elena became the unspoken exemplar, her presence a reminder that in the British Army's hierarchy, true worth emerged not in acclaim but in the steady grind, the moral tension resolved through public truth, vulnerability met with dignity. From that day forward, the platoon carried the lesson in their spines, the rigid order of ranks tempered by recognition of the hidden. In the quiet professionalism of British discipline, where boots echoed through the dawn and silences spoke volumes, Elena Hargrove stood as a testament to silent honour, the courage to endure unseen until the moment demanded light. The routine persisted, unbreakable yet transformed under the ever-present grey of English skies. The weeks after Lydd blurred into the relentless cadence of Tidworth's autumn drills, where the chalk downs turned to a slick mosaic under frequent showers, and the air carried the crisp bite of impending frost. Private Elena Hargrove moved through it all with the same measured steps that had carried her across the ranges, her presence now woven into the platoon's fabric without fanfare or disruption. Mornings began at 05:30 with the shrill réveillé from the block's tannoy, the platoon stumbling out into the half-light to form up on the square, boots scraping frost-rimed gravel in unison. Wilkins' voice, gravelly as ever, issued the day's orders. "Parade, attention, rifle drill, then live fire at 800, no slacking in this chill." Elena fell into her place, SA-80 at the slope, her posture erect amid the ranks, the faint scar along her jaw catching the weak dawn glow. No one mocked her now. The barbs that had once peppered the section's banter had dissolved like mist under the sun, leaving only the quiet efficiency of shared routine. Lance Corporal Davies, during a section brief in the armory that first Monday back, assigned her to lead the wind calls for the upcoming exercise without a trace of his former edge. "Hargrove on spotter for the long range," he stated flatly, his Geordie accent clipped to neutrality as he consulted the roster. His eyes met hers briefly, acknowledgement without apology, the shame of Lydd internalized as a recalibration of command. He handed her the spotter's scope with a nod, the exchange as procedural as signing for ammo. But the absence of smirk spoke volumes in the dim light of the racks, where the scent of gun oil mingled with the faint must of stored webbing. The transformation rippled outward, subtle as the shift in wind direction during a patrol. Corporal Hale, polishing his boots by the bay window that evening, included her in the low conversation about the next rotation to Otterburn. "Heard the moors are sodden this year. Proper test for the prone," he said. His Midlands drawl even, passing her a tin of dubbin without prompting. Eleanor accepted it with a murmured "ta," her fingers working the wax into the leather with the same precision she applied to her rifle's action. Hale's respect had always been steady, but now it carried an underlayer of deference, evident in the way he deferred to her adjustments during dry-fire sessions on the square. His voice calling confirmed to her 0 checks without question. It was the quiet dignity of the ranks, no effusive praise, just the reliable partnership forged in the grind of service, where vulnerability was met with unspoken solidarity. Among the younger privates, whispers evolved into a hushed legend, shared in the naffy over mugs of stewed tea, the steam rising like signals in the fog. Private Ellis, stacking trays in the mess hall line, leaned in one afternoon as the aroma of overcooked veg wafted from the servers. "That sequence at Lydd. Still can't get my head round it. Proper ghost in the wires, eh?" His words were tentative, admiration couched in the awe of youth, but Elena's response was reserved, a faint nod, her gaze on the horizon beyond the steamed windows. "Just the job," she replied, the understatement a shield, her internal reserve holding the details of shadow wire close, the coiled serpent tattoo a private emblem beneath her cuff. The tale spread regardless, honed in the evenings when lights dimmed and bunks creaked. Hargrove saved a patrol up in the cush, SAS ink and all. It wasn't gossip but law, the kind that bound the platoon tighter, reminding them that beneath the uniform lay stories redacted from the files etched in silent honour. Wilkins observed it all from his vantage, during inspections in the drill shed, where the echo of heels on polished wood underscored his commands. "Kid out, eyes front," he barked, pacing the line with the deliberate gait of a man who had enforced order through Belfast's rains and Hellman's dust. His notes on Elena now included qualifiers, exemplary under stress, slipped into the battalion ledger without ceremony, ensuring her quals fed into the sniper cadre pipeline at Brecon. No fanfare, institutional respect manifested in procedure, the hierarchy's rigid lines flexing just enough to elevate without upending. During a stand easy on the square, as the platoon huddled against the cookhouse wall, the chill wind tugging at cap brims, he approached her directly for the first time since the ranges. "Solid form, Hargrove. Keep it tight." The words were gruff, delivered over a shared glance at the frost-laced horizon, but they carried the weight of endorsement, the moral courage of his oversight, now aligned with her quiet competence. Reynolds and Major Ellis in the staff rooms at Brigade HQ formalized the reform through channels unseen. A memo circulated on inter-unit liaison. Elena's name flagged for advanced training attachments, perhaps even a discreet nod to Credenhill for specialist refreshers. The SAS cadre's visit, logged as routine, lingered in the undercurrents, Thorpe's salute a catalyst that reshaped perceptions without altering the core of discipline. In the field, during a night exercise across the downs, where the cold air hummed with the low whine of generators, Elena's team moved with renewed cohesion. Davies called the halt, his voice steady. "Positions, eyes out." She took the overwatch. Prone in the dew-soaked grass, her L115A3 zeroed against the dark, the wind's whisper her only companion. Hits came clean in the simulated fire, clangs lost to the night, but the section's trust was palpable. No doubts voiced, only the efficient rhythm of professionals who had glimpsed the unseen. Elena's own reflection came in stolen moments, like the quiet of the education center after hours, where she pored over signals texts under the hum of fluorescent strips. The injustice of Lydd, the sleeve grabs, the scattered rounds, had tested her reserves, but the public reckoning had unburdened them, her past no longer a solitary weight. She traced the scar on her jaw absently, the mark from that forward OP in '09, where the air had tasted of static and sand. Her intercepts a lifeline in the void. No excess heroism dwelled there. British restraint demanded she carry it forward as duty, the serpent tattoo a bond to the regiment's veiled legacy. In the platoon, she became the quiet legend, not exalted but integrated, her silence now a strength acknowledged in every shared patrol, every drill under the grey skies. From that day forward, the whispers changed, evolving from underestimation to reverence, the platoon's order tempered by the truth of hidden service. No one dared the old mockeries. Respect rose in the subtle ways, the yielded spot in the line, the nod across the mess, the steady eye contact during briefings. Eleanor Hargrove stood as emblem of the British Army's quiet professionalism, moral courage born in silence. Injustice met with endurance, recognition transformative yet restrained. In the rigid hierarchy of bases like Tidworth and ranges like Lydd, where boots echoed through the dawn and cold air honed the spirit, such stories endured, not in fanfare, but in the unbreakable spine of discipline and silent honor, under the ever-present veil of English cloud. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of No One Can Make That Shot, the SAS commander said. Then the female sniper hit 3 targets in Lydd. See you in the next one.